Now you are sharing your screen. Yeah, now we can see it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Obaid. So when you are ready, you can start. It's up to you, and we'll keep silence for the during your presentation. Okay.
Future wars will be fought on waters, not on oil. And if the predicted climate change and the population growth becomes the reality. And this statement comes from the European Commission Joint Research Center (JRC). And Ganges and the Brahmaputra River is one of the 5 hotspot area. And that's give us the glimpse of the importance of river management for our future. Good morning again, and Dr. Carlos Martin and Mr. Paul Wright, and thank you for being present here today on my thesis defense presentation. And the title of my thesis is Sustainable River Management in Bangladesh through capital raising, mitigation of environmental impacts through project management and operational best practices. And this is part of my module MLS 712 for my master's on master's science degree for sustainable maritime operation with MLA College. So before going to the presentation, let me just introduce myself about my background and what is my plan in future. I'm presently working in as a maritime legislation section in Department of Shipping in Bangladesh. I have almost 22 years experience in maritime. I started my career as a sea engineer, and then in 2010 I quit from sea and joined to shore as a chief engineer. And then I joined Lloyd's Register, the world-renowned classification society, and I was involved with the survey and audits of the vessels. And then I moved to the flag administration. In my present role, I actually look after the policy formulation, evaluation, legislation development, strategy development, and sustainable development in shipping. I have a good experience in shipbuilding, operational standards, stakeholder management, risk management, marine management system audits, and surveys. And my motivation of doing this MSc is to gain skill on research on maritime knowledge and establish myself as a expert in maritime policy and sustainability. My before join to MSc, I wrote a PDP, and actually what I want from this master's degree is to improve my skill on decision making, problem solving, critical thinking, strategic thinking, data analysis, and in-depth knowledge of maritime policy formulation and analysis. And my future plan is that I want to pursue, after obviously successful completion of this MSc, postdoctoral study in maritime policy and governance. So here is today's presentation and agendas. So we'll go one by one and we'll complete these agendas. So the introduction. So first, the background. I have already given a small background that how important river is for Bangladesh, for our future. Bangladesh is actually a delta formed by alluvial deposit by 3 major rivers, that is Meghna, Brahmaputra, and Ganges. And these rivers drains almost like 1350 billion meter cube of water per year, and also carries a massive sediments of 1.1 billion tons annually. And the problem with the sediment is it settles in the riverbed, and the river cross section get reduced. As a result, during the rainy season, the river cannot catch much of water, so it overflows and flood the areas. And again, in the winter or dry season, we have a scarcity of water. So this negatively impact on our agriculture, navigation, fisheries, environment, and all other ancillary services. So our government, considering this negative impact and also the future climate change, they have planned a holistic. They have made a holistic plan named Bangladesh Delta Plan. And capital raising plays an important part in this segment, and this plan will be implemented throughout the country for the river management. And a very good number of dredger will be deployed, almost like 250 dredgers. But now thing is that with the 250 dredgers, there come a lot of ancillary support vessel like pipe carrying barge, crane boats, oil tankers, and etc. And it is estimated that for one dredger we require almost like 7 to 8 vessel to support this dredging operation. So this will create a huge ecological impact. So the main aim of this thesis is to assist the local authorities on mitigation of environmental impact through project management, monitoring, and operational measures in ongoing and future dredging projects in Bangladesh. The anticipated result of this study is to learn the present extent of awareness, practices in environmental practices, operational measures, handling of dredge materials, and implementation of environmental mitigation measures. What are the barriers exist for implementing of these best practices, and we'll then we'll develop a framework of mitigational measures. So then comes our research question. So the first one is that we have to find out the extent of implementation of best practices of project management and operational measures. And then the next will come to how we can further improve on implementation of best practices by mitigating of barriers. So there are 4 research objectives in my study. So first one is to determine the best practices in project management and operational measures available for mitigation of environmental impact from dredge material and emission. To ascertain the extent of uses of best practices on the handling of dredge material and energy efficiency in ongoing projects. To identify the barriers of implementation of best practices of project management and operational measures. And number 4, the last one, is to identify suitable strategies to mitigate these barriers. So for this study, we have done a good number of literature review. I have divided into the 4 sections. The first section, we have reviewed the literature related to dredging method, dredger types and processes. And what we have found that correct equipment, process, and methods plays a vital role in the efficient project operation and for reducing the environmental impact. And it is very much essential to include environmental concern during the very design stage of the capital dredging works. And so we have so much of types of tools and processes. Clients may seek advice from the expert or consultants to find a acceptable and cost-effective solution within the environmental framework and the competitive contract. Then comes environmental impact and mitigational measure related literature review. The application of improvement measure, we need to go through the technical, environmental, and economical characteristic of the local areas. This varies with the project merit, and impacts are sometimes harder to predict. Monitor also it is sometimes difficult to monitor, and also not always direct under control of management. This one warrants an open-minded communication between all the stakeholders. Then in the policy and regulatory part, it is evident that there are some legal instruments from environmental acts, but there is no dedicated policy in Bangladesh on dredging covering specific controlling dredging activities, monitoring, and crew competencies. And then next comes the barriers. One of the key review questions for this study is to what are the barriers exist locally for sustainable dredging operation. There is little literature review on the barriers of implementation of environmental measures, both national and also I can say the international level. So here you can see the figure of how we have selected our literature. At the beginning, we have initially got almost like 167 of literature, but we have reduced down to 48 based on the relevancy with our study. And then again, this 48 literature we have divided into 4 segments. First is literature related to dredging in general. Literature related to dredging with environmental best practices and barriers. Literature related to capital dredging in Bangladesh, and literature on policy and regulatory related matters. So knowledge gap, during the literature review, we found that there is a limited number of studies on the barrier of implementation of environmental mitigation measures through project management and operational best practices, both nationally and internationally. This knowledge gap, socio-economy and geographic reality of Bangladesh has inspired me to focus the research in this area. And to the best of my knowledge, any previous study in similar scope has not been carried out in context of Bangladesh. So the methodology, we have used both the qualitative and quantitative method for research. So as we know that qualitative research applied to discover, recognize, and clarify circumstances, perceptions, approaches, ecological impacts, and mitigational measures of dredging. What the quantitative research has was utilized through cross-sectional study to and use Likert scale to determine the spread of attitude of dredging issues and the barriers. Then comes our sampling. We have taken a purposive expert and snowball sampling technique because we want to actually, our research is based on a query that what is the extent and what we have to do. So we have taken a small expert group for this sampling. And then primary data we have analyzed through SPSS, Excel, and manual coding. And secondary data we use mostly the content analysis. So methodology, continuing on the task one, we have got the secondary data from the literature review on 4th section, dredging in general, environmental practice and barriers, dredging in Bangladesh, and also the local policies and legislation. Then in the task 2, we have drafted a questionnaire based on the secondary data what we got, and we have carried out a pilot survey. And then we have, on the basis of outcome from the pilot survey, we have modified the questionnaire to fit in the local context. And then we have done the interview and survey through the questionnaire to get the qualitative and quantitative data. And during this interview and survey process, we ensured the ethical consideration. Then in task 3, qualitative data was collected, analyzed, and verified. We have found out the best practices for mitigation of environmental impacts and in barriers in local context. And in task 4, the quantitative data was used to quantify the best practices of mitigation of environmental impacts, barriers, and stakeholder perception. And then we have drawn a framework of overcoming these barriers. And that brings us to the conclusion of our study. So the data analysis stages, similar to last section, we have done the literature review. From there, we have collected the secondary data, and with the data, we have done the draft questionnaire. And then we have carried out a pilot survey. Then quality and quantity data was obtained through interview and Google Forms. And then data processed and analyzed. And then we have interpreted the data and we have discussed in our study. So here comes the analysis. It was actually a big area to discuss with a very small period of time, a presentation time that I have. So I'm just covering the main. So first section of our questionnaire was regarding the demographics. So among the respondents, 50% are within the age group of 18 to 24 years age. 74% either holding master or bachelor degree, because as I told that we have taken the expert samples. Then 45% are having 3 to 5 years experience. 26% are the respondents are for either dredge operators and supervisors. 74% of the respondents are involved in the cutter section dredger. 81% are involved with the technique called cutter head. Basically, it removes the sediment from the river to dislodge the sediment from the river bed. And 91% used with the hydraulic system. That hydraulic system is used to take out the sediment from the river bed to the surface. And 78% are involved with the carrying this sediment to the nearest land or the contained site or a pit. So here is the awareness level of the respondents. So though it is all the respondents, since they are expert level, they are known with the impacts of the dredging, but 74% are fully aware and 26% are know somewhat. And more than 51% of respondents are aware of the national and international pollution prevention legislation, while 32% not aware of at all. Respondents are mostly aware of the MARPOL. You can see almost like 49%, followed by our national regulation 29%. So here also what we can see that only minimum number of people are aware of the dredge related convention, that is London Convention and OSPAR Convention, and IMO's latest greenhouse gas strategies. So this figure illustrates the 10 typical best practices that have been implemented by more than 50% of the respondents, most of them being operational measures, some are technical. Monitoring engine performance, pipe leakages, correct size of pipe, using dredge material for beneficial use are the most popular. And on the bottom side, we can see that implementation of adaptive and environmental management system, having oil spill emergency plan, waste management plan is the lowest implementation rate. In this chart, we see the stakeholders' perception on the quantified on the difficulty of implementing operational best practices using a Likert chart scale 1 to 5. 1 is considered the very easy, and 5 is very difficult. Respondent gave their opinion on total 37 numbers of best practices. Among those, total 13 were considered as easy for implementation, 7 number neutral, and 12 number as difficult, and rest considered very difficult. Regular engine monitoring, optimizing the pipeline are considered most easiest, where shore power and implementing environmental and energy efficiency standards are considered the most difficult to implement. So here the barrier perception, we can see that lack of compliance and monitoring, insufficient crew awareness, lack of interest of contractors, and lack of awareness on impacts and mitigation measures are considered the major barriers by the respondents. So that brings us to the a recommendation how we can mitigate these barriers. So again, we have divided into few sections. The first one is the raising the awareness level. As we have seen from our study that awareness of the dredge crew on environmental impacts are very low. So this has there should be a training plan or training requirement so that their competency level goes up. And then we could arrange seminars, workshop training for the stakeholders. MAT, that is Maritime Educational Training Institutes, can be utilized for training of the dredge crew. At the same time, a mandatory competency certificates requirement for dredge crew, a legislation on policy to be formulated and implemented. Then comes number 2 is legislation, policy, and act. There should be as I told earlier, that there is no dedicated policy on dredging. So there should be, it is a very fruitful if there is a policy on dredging itself. And policy should support the eco-friendly and energy efficiency dredging, effective monitoring, encouraging green dredging through various financial incentives, and implementation of environmental impact assessment. Then number 3 come technological. International expert can be bought to train the dredge crew and supervisor, incentives for the eco-friendly dredge and equipment deployment, correct capacity of dredger to be used, and custom-made dredger for the local and narrow areas to be to be deployed. And then comes change in organization culture, adoption of adaptive management system, ISO 14001, ISO 50001 standards to be implemented, separate resources for environmental activities like training, dedicated personnel, and budget to be allocated. The number 5 comes financial. Though our is operational level best practices we have in our scope of study, so it doesn't require much of financial support, but still there should be some financial budget for the environmental activities, incentive for eco-friendly dredgers, equipments, and monitoring, financial support from the governments, bank, financial institute for environmental friendly and energy efficient projects. Then monitoring and management. environmental impact assessment should be made compulsory for all projects. Regulator to increase the monitoring in dredging in phases, each phases, and regulator and project owner should carry out regular environmental audits. So now that brings us to the limitation and challenge that we have faced during our study. First challenge is persuading the participants. We have to persuade the participant to participate in this study. And with the COVID-19 lockdown, it became a little difficult because we cannot meet them in face-to-face. We have to either convince them by phone or email. Then respondents are sometimes hesitant to provide sensitive information on pollution because they think that if it is, it could hamper their company or project brand image. Then for challenge 3 was we have to interview number of regulators, and for as a government office bureaucracy, we need to take verbal permission from the department head. So it also took some time. So next, limitations of my study is we have conducted interview with the structured and semi-structured interview, and it is we call it contextual, not in-depth interview. Then, as I discussed in the literature review, there is not much resources on the local context of dredging. Then the sample size. Our sample size was not big enough. It is just a small sample we took because our study was related to get an idea of the local dredging context, and we have taken the expert samples, and we manage this expert sample through networking and from using the snowball techniques. So that brings us to the conclusion. As we discussed that due to Bangladesh Delta Plan, country's SDG target to fulfill by 2030, and our economic growth will definitely increase the dredging activities in Bangladesh in few folds in coming days. There will be a huge ecological impact if this is not being carried out in a sustainable way. And what we found that execution is the key for the effectiveness of this best practices measure to mitigate this impact of the dredging. So through this study, we have found a series of best practices and implementation that will reduce the impact if it is implemented. And also we have found a number of barriers that we can remove, that we can mitigate through the recommendation that we have proposed. So future research on this topic, firstly, is that since IMO is very strong on greenhouse gas emission, so application of a low carbon energy source like ammonia, hydrogen, biofuel in dredging to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. Second could be application of data analytics, big data, sensor technology, and automation to improve the dredging efficiency. And also the development of training framework for dredge crew, and that will be very beneficial for the local context. So then that bring me to the acknowledgement of this study. My sincere gratitude to all the person who took part in the study by completing the questionnaire and attending the interview, though they have a lot of works and with the busy schedule. I also like to express my thanks to MLA College for rendering all the support all the time to complete the dissertation, especially in the COVID-19 time as well. And my deep appreciation to my dissertation supervisor, Dr. Carlos Martin, for his professional guidance throughout the studies, and he helped us a lot to reach to our target, to my target. And my sincere gratitude again to my all fellow students for their suggestion with the research. So after this presentation and during question answer session, if any amendments come, I can again accommodate these amendments, and I can submit it to the supervisor for final submission. So that brings to end to my presentation, and thank you very much, both of you, for your patient hearing. And we can now proceed to the question answer session.
Thank you, Obaid, for your presentation. It was a very good presentation. I like it very much. You can now maybe stopped sharing of screen sharing facility too. So yeah,